friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
This month shall be the first month of your year, in which I'll lead you to another land, which to the Hebrew fathers I did swear, and say to all the peoples, in this month, on full moon's eve, the paschal sacrifice to God present, and touch the doors with blood, which sign the fearsome angel shall pass by. Ezekiel the Tragedian. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And as always, I'm grateful to have your attention and to be able to come and share fellowship with you in this manner to discuss all of the weird and esoteric things that the Most High God has led me to in Revelation so that hopefully, prayerfully, you also can come to discernment on the riddles contained within the gospel and on things that many people just simply don't get. And we know that a large part of that is because most people don't care. They have no concern for anything other than the vain entertainments and distractions of this world, even though of late there has been a forced reality check upon people's lives, and that everybody everywhere has been kind of forced to examine themselves and their lives and those things that they prioritize and those things which they give their time and effort to. And unfortunately, many people are not working, and there is a lot of time for them to re examine um, everything with regard to what they are doing, what their and their spouses are doing. The whole thing of family and focus and effort, everything is now being called into question with regard to livelihood, as a lot of people are being laid off, and a lot of, unfortunately, couples and families that need two paychecks just to manage and make it. Um, that a lot of them, both spouses, are being laid off, or if they were both involved in the, for instance, the food industry, or something of, even like working at a movie theater or something, that all the large gatherings of people, or even, hosting, doing security at a sports stadium. I mean, there, you know, so so many as far as social gathering places where people go to congregate to have a good time. All of those avenues have now been shut down, and people are concerned. And even though, yes, there is a stimulus bill on the table to assist people, um, that only goes a certain way, and that people need work, people need jobs and stability in their lives. They need to know they're going to make a certain amount every month and that they're going to be able to pay even the bills that they have. Because that's the other aspect of this whole slowdown and shutdown is that the bills continue. They never stop. And the people that want your money, they are always asking. And those bills that we have already signed off on, well, they still come due. Every month, every whatever deadline we've set up, those things are still coming to term. And so this is a challenging time for people. I pray for all of you. I hope that none of you are suffering in any manner and that you are able to meet your needs and to take care of your situation, especially that of your children, those of you that have young children, even, and babies, and um, yeah, and especially for those that are single mothers or single fathers. It's a difficult time out there. We will be praying for all of you, and I hope that all of you are able to keep it together in a way that you're not having to stress or worry or not get enough sleep, or that you're really taking care of yourselves and each other as we contend with the uncertainty of these days. Um, this evening, I wanted to speak about we are going to be releasing the Enochian seasonal calendar, which runs from March through February. And it begins with Nisan, or the month of Abib, which we are in now, and continues through the end of what would be real winter, which, is the end of February, moving into March with the beginning of the vernal equinox. That's the official beginning of spring. And that usually occurs around the 20th, 21st of March, even though it did happen on the 19th of March this year because of the leap day, the 29th of February that happens once in every 4 years. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about just some other things that I've discovered with regard to the calendar. For instance, I had just recently, in reading and examining the legends of the Jews, had come across the story of the first Passover and how it was that God had mandated to Moshe on how to observe Passover and how to determine when the occurrence of Passover actually happened. And so that's something we'll go into here in a short bit. And then I wanted to, excuse me, also bring up the method of intercalation, which is discussed in the Perk de Rabbi Eleazar, which, I've been, especially in studying for the latest book that I just recently released well, it was for the conference, and that I had promised or attempted to promise that I would have a copy released for of this book for introspection during that conference, but that I would, of course, be adding to finishing and completing it um, as I had more time. And so, I did release the book, and there is incredible amount of information found within it. But already I've been still working on it and wanted to do one final proofread. And in doing that, I've added already 4 chapters to it, which at some point I'll let you know, what we're going to, when I'll release all that information. But I will share it and discuss it. So it's not going to be necessary for you to have to go out and purchase the book again. For those of you that already have it, we'll be discussing that information at some point. Just because the stories that are related to the whole topic of the garments of power and the rod of wonder are absolutely mind blowing, and the whole way that this book came about and all of the different books that I had to read to put together the storyline behind these legendary relics and how they were incorporated into the lives of the patriarchs and the prophets, and also that of the nation of Israel, um, is so incredible. I mean, really, it is so incredible. And it is prophetic in and of itself, because even just the limb of the rod of wonder, the one of the 2 artifacts that I traced down in story within this narrative, even this particular item is said to have been a limb from the tree of life, and that this limb was made even before the foundations of the world, and that paradise and the temple of God, the Holy of Holies, the throne of the Most High, that they had been in existence before earth or humanity was manifest. And we know the tree of life is in the garden of God, in the place where the righteous New Jerusalem is currently located, above the vaulted dome of the earth, and that um, this particular item is said to have been inscribed with the name of the Most High God, as well as the 6 male and 3 female patriarchs and matriarchs that were instrumental in, um, bringing forth in lineage, and that were famous and well recognized in the story of, humanity here upon the earth. And that also in sigil there was emblazoned upon the length of this staff the 10 plagues that would occur during the time of the Exodus. And so this particular item was prophetically encoded with the story of the Exodus, how it would lead to the first Passover, and would also uh, prophetically reveal the story of the patriarchs and matriarchs, which would bring forth the the fulfillment of what Isaiah calls the stem of Jesse. which is the Messiah. And it's it's absolutely mind blowing. And so tomorrow night I will be doing a show, and I'm going to be talking about some of the aspects of this narrative that are already found in the book and available in the material, but just to elaborate on certain themes. And I don't believe I've actually discussed what I'm going to talk about tomorrow night in show previously, but guaranteed to be a mind blower. So, yeah. But also this evening, I'm going to be on with Rob, and we'll be doing a continuation on the Book of Enoch, which I did want to release as well. That those of you that are familiar with the Lost Book of King Og of Bashan, the Rephaim king, that was released by this individual named Peter Damon, which is odd, Demmon, and he happens to have connections with a Father Martin of the Vatican Library that is one of the few to have access to the secret Vatican archives. I know this all just sounds, you know, mysterious and bizarre. But, anyways, these two individuals have now released a book on Lamech of the line of Cain and how they worshiped Leviathan and also sacrificed children unto this particular strange beast, which is interesting because Rob and I were just talking about this particular creature and behemoth in the last show that we did on the Book of Enoch. But they've also released together with the Enochian Book of the Giants and the Lost Book of King Og of Bashan, the first 36 chapters of the Book of Enoch. And so all of these things are now found together in one book. And it's the same price as getting just the Book of King Og of Bashan, which, if you haven't read it, is an amazing read and one that I certainly encourage people to become familiar with, even though I'm not in any manner saying it is inspired, but it is without a doubt based on ancient account. And it is from an Aramaic text, which, in my opinion, the Aramaic and the Hebrew are the oldest and the most ancient. And there was also a Latin manuscript of King Og of Bashan, and that there have been other previous accounts, but that this text was eradicated by the Catholic Church and attacked for being pagan lore. And so we're lucky to even have a surviving remnant. And this particular Aramaic translation of this text is pretty extent. There's only 2 chapters which are dicey, chapter 7 and chapter 9. And chapter 7 is a declaration of King Og and his hate for Nimrod. And then the last chapter, chapter 9, I believe, it's kind of butchered, but it's a narrative between Og and Moshe as they are about to go to war. And it's a whole diatribe of King Og basically um, cursing Moshe and calling him things like a fecal worm, which is pretty low down when you think about it. But anyways, and so those manuscripts have been just recently released, and I do hope that they release more and release others and books that we don't have uh, access to. Because God, can you imagine the kind of things that they have in the Vatican Library? I mean, they have hundreds of books that are nowhere else to be found, probably thousands, because they've, had people that have been part of the Illuminati elite that have dedicated and donated. Even this particular book was said to be a donation by an individual during the Roman times, a Cassidorius. And so, something to consider. But, anyways, going to go back to the calendar. And I wanted to, I'm going to, especially with Passover coming up, which tonight should be, and actually it should be very soon, because the sun is going down right now here on the East Coast, United States of America. But if you look to your western skies in about 30 minutes or so, once the sun completely sets, 30 to 50 minutes, you should see the first sliver of the waxing crescent. It was 1% early this morning. And so it should make its first appearance this evening and announce what is Rosh Chodesh for the month of Nisan. And for those of you that have our calendar that we released in January, one of the reasons I tell people to always look for the sighting of the uh, the waxing crescent as visual confirmation is because the calendar often will get skewed, and it is difficult to create something and release it months in advance, especially when the average synodic month is 29.541 days. And that little bit of being over the 29.5, it adds and it eventually skews the calendar and will have 30-day months back to back. And so that the calendar will be off by one day. And so, yes, we are aware that on the older calendar that we have Kadesh as occurring yesterday. And so, but in my opinion, according to the website that I added to the description of the show found on our Facebook page, and I'll give it to you now because this is a great site to go to get um, to keep up with when the the waxing crescent is being sighted. It is called the truthofyahweh.org and /moon.htm. It is a new moon report, and it has a visual confirmation for the moon being sighted in all the areas of the world. And so people can actually submit if they were visual witness, wherever they may be. Um, but as I said, it will be tonight. That some are reporting, and that it should be sighted, as I said, very soon in western skies. And so, this being the first day of the month of Nisan, we have the Sabbaths occurring 8 days, 8, 15, 22, and 29 days after the appearance of the waxing crescent, which would put the Sabbaths, put them in alignment with, let me go to it, with the 1st of April is the first quarter Sabbath. The full moon Sabbath will be the 8th of April. The third quarter Sabbath, the 15th of April. And the lunar conjunctive Sabbath, the 22nd of April, which means that Passover will be on the Tuesday before the 8th of April, which will be the 7th. And for those that heard, the quote that I read at the very beginning, let me read it again, because this is a very interesting quote. And it's from a text that most people have never read. It's called the Ezekiel the Tragedian, and it's found in the pseudepigraphal volume 2, I believe it is, of the James Charlesworth, those two huge volumes on the pseudepigrapha that you can purchase on Amazon. Those are two of my most favorite books. They have hundreds of extra biblical texts within them. They are some of the first collections of ancient manuscripts, extra biblical texts that I had owned and became familiar with. And reading that material, I learned about even the other books of Enoch and so many others. Jubilees is contained within them, and so many. I mean, incredible the amount of information that is found within those two manuscripts. But anyways, this quotation, and listen closely, pay attention. This month shall be the first month of your year, in which I'll lead you to another land, which to the Hebrew fathers I did swear, and say to all the peoples, in this month, on full moon's eve, the eve of the full moon, the paschal sacrifice to God present, and touch the doors with blood, which sign the fearsome angel shall pass by. And so God is instructing them to do the paschal sacrifice, which is Passover, on the eve of full moon, which is the 14th of Nisan. Because as I've been stating and as I've been sharing and covering with people for a very long time, the Sabbaths are determined by the 7-day phases of the moon. And each quarterly phase is aligned to one of the 4 Sabbaths that occur each lunar month. And so this particular passage tells you, it confirms that the full moon is in alignment, or full moon eve is in alignment with the Paschal celebration. And so, without a doubt, Passover, the Paschal sacrifice, the 14th of Nisan, is on the eve of the full moon. And on the 15th of Nisan, which is the Sabbath of unleavened bread, that always occurs on the 15th of Nisan, which is in alignment with the full moon. And so, those of you that do have our calendar, you can adjust it by one day, and it will tell you as to exactly when, all of the, as far as the 7 perfect weeks leading up to Pentecost, the counting of the Omer, when Passover, all of that occurs. And so, and as I said, within a week, I'll be releasing the new version, so that it will be back in alignment with the confirming witness of this evening, which again, as I stated, tonight should be the first appearance of the waxing crescent. And it should be Rosh Chodesh for the month of Nisan, which is so perfect with regard to this particular passage, this particular verse from Ezekiel, the tragedian, because it is relevant for us and this evening, and with Passover upcoming in 2 weeks' time. Now, I wanted to share something else with you. This is a passage that I found in the Legends of the Jews, and it was about the first Passover. And so let me read it for you, because it also confirms without a doubt that the calendar is lunar based, and it is connected to the phases of the moon. And that if you're not keeping tabs and allowing the lunar phases to determine your Sabbaths, then essentially you're following a calendar which is flawed and really can't determine the Levitical feast days or keep up with how the Sabbaths are supposed to truly occur and be observed and mandate. And so it says this: when the time approached in which, according to the promise made to Abraham, his children would be redeemed, it was seen that they had no pious deeds to their credit, for the sake of which they deserved release from bondage. God therefore gave them 2 commandments, one bidding them to sacrifice the paschal lamb, and one to circumcise their sons. Along with the first, they received the calendar in use among the Jews, for the Passover feast is to be celebrated on the 15th day of the month of Nisan. And with this month, the year is to begin. But the computations for the calendar are so involved that Moses could not understand them until God showed him the movements of the moon plainly. Did you catch that? And so, let me read that last sentence one more time. But the computations for the calendar are so involved that Moses could not understand them until God showed him the movements of the moon plainly. And see, it is the movements of the moon. It is its movement through being a waxing crescent to then in 7 days becoming a first quarter moon, and then 7 more days becoming a full moon, and then 7 more days going to be a third quarter moon, and then in 7 more days becoming a new, as far as a lunar conjunctive moon, a dark moon, and completely void of light. These are the phases of the moon, and those are the Sabbaths that are determined by the phases. And so it should be clear to those of you that have followed my work and have read these extra biblical manuscripts that Sabbath, without a doubt, is determined by the moon. And I know a lot of people still are unwilling to accept this, and that's fine. I'm not condemning or judging anybody out there for the way you follow and determine Sabbath, but in my opinion, when you do read a lot of the other ancient sources, this is self-evident as truth. And there's a guy out there named Troy Miller who has a creation calendar .org, I believe is the name of his ministry. Let me check. Creationcalendar.com. I believe he is the smartest when it comes to having followed and observed the unfolding of this calendar in the heavens with the witness of daily observance over, I don't know how long he's been doing it, but certainly a lot longer than I have. And even though we still have, slight differences of opinion on certain things, I really respect him and his wisdom with regard to this research more than I do anybody else out there besides, like Enoch and Philo and the other ancient witnesses, Jasher and Jubilees and things of that nature. The Perkti, Rabbi Eleazar, all these ancient sources, of course, which I look to establish my truth. I really think that Troy has done his homework in having studied this out and having provided information that keeps everybody in tabs with what's going on in the heavens. And, I asked him a long time ago how to really create a calendar, a print calendar that people could follow and have on their wall. And he told me a long time ago it was impossible. And having tried in doing what we've done with our efforts on creating the Enochian calendar, it is largely impossible because of the way that the calendar skews itself, and that you never know when a couple of 30-day lunar months back to back. And so, but we try and we keep fixing, our mistakes and because we are trying to give you a visual that you can look to better understand what's going on in the heavens, and also to give you a calendar so that you can familiarize yourself with the names of the Hebrew months and the way that God's calendar is structured and the way that it largely unfolds. And so I know a lot of you appreciate our efforts in doing so. Um, but, again, it is not a perfect process. And it's impossible to create a calendar a year in advance that's going to be absolutely right. I mean, I'm happy if we're, 80% correct, because there is going to be those couple of months that things get thrown off eventually because of the way that the average synodic month, it is this 29.541 days. Um, but anyways, I encourage people to contact him at the creationcalendar.com. Tell him that we sent you, and he'll get you on his email list. And he, does a really good job of putting out a month at a time, nowhere in, months in advance, but he does it a month at a time and lets people know when the witness of the waxing crescent and then the establishment for the Sabbath, all are going to occur for that upcoming month. And as I said, he's got a lot of information on his website as well that is mostly based on just King James Version, um, that you can share with your friends and your family and people that, don't look to outside sources and that don't respect them and reject them outright without, accepting them as authoritative in any manner. Which there are a lot of people like that. Not one of them, of course. And I like to study all things extra biblical. Um, I study a lot, directly from the Bible as well. But I do like to read and to study from the less familiar, mostly infamous, unknown type manuscripts as well, because I believe there are so many nuggets of information that help to establish truth and the study of truth, and, you know, seeking those of us that are seekers of lost paradise, um, that a lot of these ancient manuscripts can certainly help people to find the way, I believe, to truth and discernment that may not be readily available from just the canonical materials themselves. And that's just my opinion. Oh, and so let me go back and finish reading. What I was reading as far as the first Passover. All right, continuing. I'll read that one sentence once more. But the computations for the calendar are so involved that Moses could not understand them until God showed him the movements of the moon plainly. There were three other things equally difficult, which Moses could comprehend only after God made him to see them plainly. They were the compounding of the holy anointing oil, the construction of the candlestick in the tabernacle, and the animals, the flesh of which is permitted or prohibited to eat. Also, the determination of the new moon was the subject of special divine teaching, that Moses might know the exact procedure. God appeared to him in a garment with fringes upon its corners, and bade Moses stand at his right hand, and Aaron at his left. And then, citing Michael and Gabriel as witnesses, he addressed searching questions to the angels as to how the new moon had seemed to them. Then the Lord addressed Moses and Aaron, saying, Thus shall my children proclaim the new moon on the testimony of two witnesses and through the president of the court. And so, you know, there has been for a very long time a mandate set into place that the witnesses would look to and watch for what is the occurrence of and the appearance of the waxing crescent. And which, again, those of you that can, maybe on the upcoming break, which is in like 5, 6 minutes, 7, 8 minutes or so, take a peek towards your western skies and see if you can see the waxing crescent. And this is when the Sanhedrin would assign a couple of guys to look for. And when they saw the waxing crescent, they would report it to the Sanhedrin. And then, based on the two eyewitnesses, then the shofars would be blown across Israel. And the blasting sound of the shofar would announce the beginning of the new moon convocation, which was a celebration. And the people would run, and this was called the time that no man knoweth, the day or the hour. It's because nobody knew when the waxing crescent was going to appear. But when it did, that's when the shofars were sounded, and the Israelites would run to the temple to celebrate the new moon convocation, which is not a Sabbath. It's different than a Sabbath. It's the time of the new moon, the Kadesh, which is celebrated in the evening when the moon is sighted until the dawn. And then with the dawn, that is the beginning of the second day or the first working day after the Kadesh. And then, you count 6 working days, and on the 8th day, you have the first quarter Sabbath, 6 more working days on the day after that. You have the full moon Sabbath, on and on and on. All right, let me continue reading here. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to read the fullness of this story of Passover. which I guess I can. Even though not all of it is about the calendar, which I think is the most relevant aspect, but I guess it would be good for me to share it with you. So I'll keep reading. All right. When Moses appeared before the children of Israel and delivered the divine message to them, telling them that their redemption would come about in this month of Nisan, they said, "How is it possible that we should be redeemed? Is not the whole of Egypt full of our idols, and we have no pious deeds to show, making us worthy of redemption?" Moses made reply and said, "As God desires your redemption, he pays no heed to your idols. He passes them by, nor does he look upon your evil deeds, but only upon the good deeds of the pious among you." God would not indeed have delivered Israel if they had not abandoned their idol worship. Unto this purpose he commanded them to sacrifice the paschal lamb. Thus they were to show that they had given up the idolatry of the Egyptians, consisting in the worship of the ram. The early law was different from the practice of latter times, for they were bidden to select their sacrificial animal 4 days before the day appointed for the offering, and to designate it publicly as such to show that they did not stand in awe of the Egyptians. With a heavy heart, the Egyptians watched the preparations of the Israelites for sacrificing the animals that they worshipped. Yet they did not dare interpose an objection. And when the time came for the offering to be made, the children of Israel could perform the ceremonies without a tremor, seeing that they knew through many days' experience that the Egyptians feared to approach them with hostile intent. There was another practice connected with the slaughter of the paschal lamb. That was to show the Egyptians how little the Israelites feared them. They took of the blood of the animal and openly put it on the 2 side posts and on the lintel of the doors of their houses. Moses communicated the laws regulating the Passover sacrifice to the elders, and they in turn made them known to the people at large. The elders were commended for having supported the leader at his first appearance, for the faith in Moses caused the whole people to adhere to him at once. And therefore God spake, saying, "I will reward the elders for inspiring the people with confidence in Moses. They shall have the honor of delivering Israel. They shall lead the people to the Passover sacrifice, and through this, the redemption will be brought about." All right, we got 2 minutes. The ceremonies connected with the Passover sacrifice had the purpose of conveying instruction to Israel about the past and the future alike. The blood put on the 2 side posts and on the lintel of their doors was to remind them of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the bunch of hyssop for sprinkling the blood on the doors was to imply that although Israel's position among the peoples of the earth is as lowly as that of the hyssop among the plants, yet this little nation is bound together like the bunch of hyssop, for it is God's peculiar treasure. The paschal sacrifice afforded Moses the opportunity for introducing the children of Israel to submit themselves to circumcision, which many had refused to do until then, in spite of his urgent appeals. But God has means of persuasion. He caused a wind to blow that wafted the sweet scents of paradise towards Moses' paschal lamb, and the fragrance penetrated to all parts of Egypt, to the distance of 40 days' journey. The people were attracted in crowds to Moses' lamb, and desired to partake of it. But he said, "This is the command of God. No uncircumcised person shall eat thereof." And they all decided to undergo circumcision. When the Lord passed through the land of Egypt, he blessed every Israelite for his fulfillment of the two commands, the command of the Paschal sacrifice and the command regarding circumcision. The Lord performed a great miracle for the Israelites, as no sacrifice may be eaten beyond the borders of the Holy Land. All the children of Israel were transported thither on clouds, and after they had eaten of the sacrifice, they were carried back to Egypt in the same way. All right, when we return, I'll finish up with the final portion. We'll be right back.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Everybody, for our second hour, I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. Still waiting to see if people are able to see or spot the waxing crescent. It could be that it is tomorrow. I was just going by this, which I said, thetruthofyahweh.org, and it was projecting that it would be tonight. But I know earlier it was a 1% moon, which, if you go to the creation calendar site, there's an app there for the phases of the moon that you can download to your phone, and it will tell you exactly what the percentage is. And let's see. It is 2% of full now. And so that might still be not enough to make it appear, or it still could be a little bit early. So we'll give it a little bit of time, perhaps a little bit later, because as I said, it's always about 50 minutes after the sun goes down, and it will make an appearance for a short time before following the sun in setting on the western horizon. So if you do spot it, give us a shout out in the chat room. But we're going to continue in this show. And that website again, creationcalendar.com. And then the other for the new moon report is thetruthofyahweh.org /moon.htm. All right, I'm going to finish this story for you. And then we're going to go into something else with regard to the calendar. All right, continuing with the story of the first Passover from the Legends of the Jews. When Moses announced the slaying of the firstborn, the designated victims all repaired to their fathers and said, "Whatever Moses hath foretold has been fulfilled. Let the Hebrews go, else we shall all die." But the fathers replied, "It is better for one of every 10 of us to die than the Hebrews should execute their purpose." Then the firstborn repaired to Pharaoh to induce him to dismiss the children of Israel. So far from granting their wish, he ordered his servants to fall upon the firstborn and beat them, to punish them for their presumptuous demand. Seeing that they could not accomplish their end by gentle means, they attempted to bring it about by force. Pharaoh and all that opposed the wishes of the firstborn were of the opinion that the loss of so inconsiderable a percentage of the population was a matter of small moment. They were mistaken in their calculation, for the divine decree included not only the firstborn sons, but also the firstborn daughters, and not only the firstborn of the marriages then existing, but also the firstborn issuing from previous alliances of the fathers and the mothers. And as the Egyptians led dissolute lives, it happened not rarely that each of the 10 children of one woman was the firstborn of its father. Finally, God decreed that death should smite the oldest member of every household, whether or not he was the firstborn of his parents. What God resolves is executed. At the exact instant marking the middle of the night, so precise that only God himself could determine and discern it, he appeared in Egypt attended by 9,000 myriads of the angels of destruction, who are fashioned, some of hail and some of flames, and whose glances drive terror and trembling to the heart of the beholder. These angels were about to precipitate themselves into the work of annihilation, but God restrained them, saying, "My wrath will not be appeased until I myself execute vengeance upon the enemies of Israel." Those among the Egyptians who gave credence to Moses' words and tried to shield their firstborn children from death sent them to their Hebrew neighbors to spend the fateful night with them in the hope that God would exempt the houses of the children of Israel from the plague. But in the morning, when the Israelites arose from their sleep, they found the corpses of the Egyptian fugitives next to them. That was the night in which the Israelites prayed before lying down to sleep. Quote, "Cause us, O Lord our God, to lie down in peace. Remove Satan from before us and from behind us, and guard our going out and our coming in unto life and unto peace. For it was Satan that had caused frightful bloodshed among the Egyptians." Among the slain there were, beside the Egyptian firstborn, also the firstborn of other nationalities residing in Egypt, as well as the Egyptian firstborn dwelling outside of their own land. Even the long dead of the firstborn were not spared. The dogs dragged their corpses out of their graves in the houses, for it was the Egyptian custom to inter the dead at home. At the appalling sight, the Egyptians mourned, as though the bereavement had fallen them but recently. The very monuments and statues erected to the memory of the firstborn dead were changed into dust, which was scattered and flew out of sight. Moreover, their slaves had to share the fate of the Egyptians, and no less the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon. For none was so low, but he hated the Hebrews, and rejoiced when the Egyptians decreed their persecution. The female slaves that ground corn between millstones were in the habit of saying, "We do not regret our servitude if only the Israelites are gagged too." In dealing out punishment to these aliens in the land of Egypt, God showed that he was at once the master of the land and the Lord over all the gods of the nations. For if the slaves and the captives of war had not been smitten, they would have said, "Mighty is our God who helped us in this plague." For the same reason, all the idols of the Egyptians were swept out of existence in that night. The stone idols were ground into dust. The wooden idols rotted, and those made of metal melted away. And so the Egyptians were kept from ascribing their chastisement to the wrath of their own gods. Likewise, the Lord God slew the firstborn of the cattle, for the Egyptians paid worship to animals, and they would have attributed their misfortune to them. In all these ways the Lord showed them that their gods were but vanity. Pharaoh rose up in the night of the smiting of the firstborn. He waited not for the third hour of the morning, when kings usually arise, nor did he wait to be awakened, but he himself roused his slaves from their slumber, and all the other Egyptians, and together they went forth to seek Moses and Aaron. He knew that Moses had never spoken an untruth, and as he had said, I will see thy face again no more. He could not count upon Moses coming to him. There remained nothing for him to do but to go in search of the Israelitish leader. He did not know where Moses lived, and he had great difficulty and lost much time in looking for his house. For the Hebrew lads of whom he had made inquiries when he met them in the street played practical jokes on him, misdirected him, and led him astray. Thus he wandered about a long time, all the while weeping and crying out, "Oh, my friend Moses, pray for me to God." Meanwhile, Moses and Aaron and all Israel beside were at the paschal meal, drinking wine as they sat and leaned to one side, and singing songs in praise of God, the Hallel, which they were the first to recite. When Pharaoh finally reached the door of the house wherein Moses abode, he called to him, and from Moses the question came back, Who art thou, and what is thy name? I am Pharaoh, who stands here humiliated. Moses asked again, Why dost thou come to me thyself? Is it the custom of kings to linger at the doors of common folk? I pray thee, my lord, returned Pharaoh, come forth and intercede for us, else there will not remain a single being in Egypt. I may not come forth, for God hath commanded us, none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. And it's in the morning, as I've shared as well, that Sabbath begins with the dawn of the morning sunrise, and Sabbath continues until dusk, twilight, when the sun sets. But Pharaoh continued to plead, Do but step to the window and speak with me. And when Moses yielded to his importunities and appeared at the window, the king addressed these words to him. Thou didst say yesterday, All the firstborn in the land of Egypt will die, but now as many as 9/10 of the inhabitants have perished. Pharaoh was accompanied by his daughter, Bithiah, Moses' foster mother. She reproached him with ingratitude in having brought down evil upon her and her countrymen. And Moses answered and said, 10 plagues the Lord brought upon Egypt. Hath evil accrued to thee from any of them? Did one of them affect thee? And when Bithiah acknowledged that no harm had touched her, Moses continued to speak. Although thou art thy mother's firstborn, thou shalt not die, and no evil shall reach thee in the midst of Egypt. But Bithiah said, Of what advantage is my security to me when I see the king, my brother, and all his household, and his servants in this evil plight, and look upon their firstborn perishing with all the firstborn of Egypt? And Moses returned, Verily, thy brother and his household and the other Egyptians would not hearken to the words of the Lord. Therefore did this evil come upon them. Turning to Pharaoh, Moses said, In spite of all that hath happened, I will teach thee something, if thou desirest to learn, and thou wilt be spared, and thou wilt not die. Raise thy voice and say, Ye children of Israel, ye are your own masters. Prepare for your journey, and depart from among my people. Hitherto ye were the slaves of Pharaoh, but henceforward ye are under the authority of God. Serve the Lord your God. Moses made him say these words 3 times, and God caused Pharaoh's voice to be heard throughout the land of Egypt, so that all the inhabitants, the homeborn and the aliens, knew that Pharaoh had released the children of Israel from the bondage in which they had languished. And all Israel sang, Alleluia! Praise, O ye servants of the Lord! Praise the name of the Lord, for they belong to the Lord, and no more were the servants of Pharaoh. Now the king of Egypt insisted upon their leaving the land without delay. But Moses objected and said, Are we thieves that we should slink away under cover of the night? Wait until morning. Pharaoh, however, urged and begged Moses to depart, confessing that he was anxious about his own person, for he was a firstborn son, and he was terrified that death would strike him down too. Moses dissipated his alarm, though he submitted a new horror with the words, Fear not, there is worse in store for thee. Dread seized upon the whole people. Every one of the Egyptians were afraid of losing his life, and they all united their prayers with Pharaoh's and begged Moses to take the Israelites hence. And God spake, Ye shall all find your end, not here, but in the Red Sea. Pharaoh and the Egyptians let their dead lie unburied, while they hastened to help the Israelites load their possessions on wagons to get them out of the land with as little delay as possible. When they left, they took with them, beside their own cattle, the sheep and the oxen that Pharaoh had ordered his nobles to give them as presents. The king also forced his magnates to beg pardon of the Israelites for all they had suffered, knowing as he did that God forgives an injury done by man to his fellow only after the wrongdoer has recovered the goodwill of his victim by confessing and regretting his fault. Now depart, said Pharaoh to the Israelites. I want nothing from you but that you should pray to God for me, that I may be saved from death. The hatred of the Egyptians toward the Israelites changed now into its opposite. They conceived affection and friendship for them, and fairly forced raiment upon them and jewels of silver and jewels of gold to take along with them on their journey. Although the children of Israel had not yet returned the articles they had borrowed from their neighbors at an earlier time. This action is in part to be explained by the vanity of Pharaoh and his people. They desired to pretend before the world that they were vastly rich, as everybody would conclude when this wealth of their mere slaves was displayed to observers. Indeed, the Israelites bore so much away from Egypt that one of them alone might have defrayed the expense of building and furnishing the tabernacle. On their leaving the land, only the private wealth of the Egyptians was in their hands. But when they arrived at the Red Sea, they came into possession of the public treasure. 2. For Pharaoh, like all kings, carried the monies of the state with him on his campaigns, in order to be prepared to hire a relay of mercenaries in case of defeat. Great as the other treasure was, the booty captured at the sea far exceeded it. But if the Israelites loaded themselves down with goods and jewels and money, it was not to gratify love of riches, or as any usurer might say, because they coveted their neighbor's possessions. In the first place, they could look upon their plunder as wages due to them for those they had long served. And secondly, they were entitled to retaliate on those at whose hands they had suffered wrong. Even then, they were requiting them with an affliction far slighter than any one of all they had endured themselves. The plagues did not stay the cruelty of the Egyptian oppressors toward the Hebrews. It continued unabated until the very end of their sojourn in the land. On the day of the Exodus, Rachel, the daughter of Shuthelah, gave birth to a child while she and her husband together were treading the clay for bricks. The babe dropped from her womb into the clay and sank out of sight. Gabriel appeared, molded a brick out of the clay containing the child, and carried it to the highest of the heavens, where he made it a footstool before the divine throne. In that night it was that God looked upon the suffering of Israel and smote the firstborn of the Egyptians. And it is one of the 4 nights that God has inscribed in the book of memorial. The first of the 4 is that which in which God appeared to create the world. All was waste and void, and darkness brooded over the abyss until the Lord came and spread light round about by his word. The second night is that in which God appeared unto Abraham at the covenant of the pieces. In the third night he appeared in Egypt, slaying the firstborn of the Egyptians with his right hand, and protecting the firstborn of the Israelites with his left. The fourth night recorded will be that in which the end of the redemption will be accomplished, when the iron yoke of the wicked kingdom will be broken, and the evildoers will be destroyed. Then will Moses come from the desert, and the Messiah from Rome, each at the head of his flock, and the word of God will mediate between them, causing both to walk with one accord in the same direction. Israel's redemption in future days will happen on the 15th of Nisan, the night of Israel's redemption from Egypt. For thus did Moses say, in this night God protected Israel against the angel of destruction, and in this night he will also redeem the generations of the future. Though the actual deliverance from Egypt took place in that night, the Hebrews did not leave the land until the following day. During the same night, God requited the Egyptians for their evil deeds in the sight of all the people, the night being as bright as day at the time of the summer solstice. Not one could escape the general chastisement, for by divine dispensation none was absent from home at the time, so that none could fail to see the chastisement. The angels in heaven learnt what was happening on earth when they were about to begin their song of praise to God. He silenced them with the words, "My children on earth are singing now," and the celestial hosts had to stop and listen to the song of Israel. Great as the joy of the Hebrews was at their deliverance from the Egyptian bondage, it was exceeded by that of Pharaoh's people at seeing their slaves depart. For with them went the dread of death that had obsessed them. They were like the portly gentleman riding an ass. The rider feels uncomfortable and longs for the moment of alighting, but his longing cannot compare in intensity with that of the ass, groaning under the corpulent burden. And when their journey's end is reached, the ass rejoices more than his master. So the Egyptians were happier to be rid of the Hebrews than these were to be free. In general, the Israelites were not in a joyous mood. The strength of men is readily exhausted mentally and physically, but the strain of a sudden change from slavery to freedom. They did not recover vigor and force until they heard the angel hosts sing songs of praise and joy over the redemption of Israel and the redemption of the Shekinah. For so long as the chosen people is in exile, the Shekinah who dwells among Israel is also, as it were, in exile. At the same time, God caused the earth to exhale and send aloft a healing fragrance which cured them of all their diseases. The exodus of the Israelites began at Ramses, and although the distance from there to the city of Mizraim, where Moses' abode, was a 40 days' journey, yet they heard the voice of their leader urging them to leave the land. They covered the distance from Ramses to Sukkoth, a 3 days' march, in an instant. In Sukkoth, God enveloped them in 7 clouds of glory, 4 hovering in front, behind, and the 2 sides of them, one suspended above them to keep off rain, hail, and the rays of the sun, and one under them to protect them against thorns and snakes. The 7th cloud preceded them and prepared the way for them, exalting the valleys and making low every mountain and hill. Thus they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years. In all that time, no artificial lighting was needed. A beam from the celestial cloud followed them into the darkest of chambers, and if one of the people had to go outside of the camp, even thither he was accompanied by a fold of the cloud, covering and protecting him. Only that a difference might be made between day and night, a pillar of fire took the place of the cloud in the evening. Never for an instant were the people without the one or the other to guide them. The pillar of the fire glowed in front of them before the pillar of cloud retired. And in the morning, the cloud was there before the fire vanished. The clouds of glory and the pillar of fire were sent for the protection of Israel alone, for none beside, not for the heathen and not for the mixed multitude that went up with them. These had to walk outside of the cloud enclosure. The cavalcade consisted of 600,000 heads of families afoot, each accompanied by 5 children on horseback. And to these must be added the mixed multitude, exceeding the Hebrews vastly in number. So profound was Israel's trust in the Lord that they followed Moses unmurmuringly into the wilderness without supplying themselves with provisions. The only edibles they took were the remains of the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs, and these not to satisfy their hunger, but because they were unwilling to separate themselves from what they had prepared lovingly at the command of God. These possessions were so dear to them that they would not entrust them to the beasts of burden. They carried them on their own shoulders. And that is the account of the first Passover. Now, what I wanted to share with you is a couple of stories that I share in the new book about Passover and its celebration, and also how it is that it links to the birth of Isaac, and also to the account where God asks Abraham to present Isaac as sacrifice. That these two events actually occurred on Passover as well. And let me pull it up from what I have been writing. I want to share with you a couple of verses as well, that the freedom that God had promised to Abraham of his bloodline being that they would be in bondage for 430 years. That this is also directly linked precisely to the birth of Isaac. And so let me find that for you so I can share that story with you. As it is also an amazing tale. And you'll see that the account of Passover, the celebration of it, that it preceded here we go. It preceded the Exodus and the story of Exodus, and how Passover was established by the smiting of the firstborn, and that God knew and had Passover as a celebration observed by Adam and all of the generations of his descendants going forth from him, even to, again, as I said, to Isaac, and that Isaac was born on Passover night in the same manner that Yahushua would die as the Passover lamb, and that we see the story of God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, that this was a foreshadowing of what he would do for us in fulfilling John 3:16. Which, let me bring this up as well. Because the Passover, it is the fulfillment of the promise that God gave that the word of the Lord gave to Adam. That whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And the story of the redemption, the story of the restoration, the rectification of the fall of humanity, of our being restored to our original estate, to our original bright nature. That is the story of Passover. And so I'm going to share these passages with you, and it's going to blow your mind, because this is, the story of Passover, the redemption through Christ. It's all linked together, and the angels celebrate it in heaven even now. And even, the story of Cain and Abel and the sacrifice that they made, where Cain's offering was rejected. And the reason it was rejected is because he didn't even offer up the best of his fruits. You can read in, I believe it's the book of Jasher, or the book of Jubilees, I believe it's book of Jasher, that the offering that Cain made, it involved even rotten fruit. And so God rejected it. But he was not serious in any manner. But it was a Passover sacrifice that he and Abel made that offering. It was on Passover. And it was Passover that his offering was rejected. And the murder of Abel took place that night. And so Abel also was the lamb without spot or blemish. He was sacrificed. He was killed by his half-brother Cain. And so not only was he the first casualty in the war of enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, but he was also a type and a shadow of the Passover lamb and of the coming of Messiah. All right. So I want to share this with you. And I have two witnesses. One is from the Legends of the Jews, and the other from the Perk de Rabbi Eliezer. It says this. And, these ancient commentaries, for those that are interested in the biblical narrative, if you want more detail about almost every story, like reading the Targum, it is just jam-packed with information. And so I recommend that people get those. Now, they are freely available online. All you have to do is search, the Legends of the Jews or the Perk de Rabbi Eliezer. But, for those that like the larger font, we do produce all of our books in 14-point font, so it's easier to read and study from and to see. They are available at sacredwordpublishing.com. The Legends of the Jews is a 4-book series. They're like 300 to 400 pages each. And so an incredible amount of information on all the stories, from the beginning of Genesis, going through the life of Moshe and the other judges. And then we have the Perkti Rabbi Eleazar, which our friend Carol Austin did the most incredible job of preserving and fixing the footnotes and increasing the font and making all that just spectacular in the time that she spent to preserve all that information. I mean, she did a service to humanity that people should really appreciate the time and effort that Carol did in doing those books. I mean, they are incredible for those that like to study. All right, so here are the sources. The nightfall of the festival day of Passover came, and Isaac called unto Esau his elder son and said, O my son, tonight the heavenly ones utter songs. On this night the treasures of dew are opened. On this day the blessings of the dews is bestowed. Make me savory meat whilst I am still alive, and I will bless thee. The Holy Spirit rejoined, saying to him, Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainties. He went to fetch it, and was delayed there. Rebekah said to Jacob his other son, On this night the treasuries of the dew will be opened, and on this night the angels utter a song. Make savory meat for thy father, that he may eat, and whilst he still lives, he may bless thee. Now Jacob was skilled in the Torah, and his heart dreaded the curse of his father. His mother said to him, My son, if it be a blessing, may it be upon thee, and upon thy seed. If it be a curse, let it be upon me, and upon my soul, as it is said. And his mother said to him, Upon me be thy curse, my son. He went and brought 2 kids of the goats, the food for Isaac. But he brought one as a paschal offering, and with the other he prepared the savory meat to eat, and he brought it to his father. And he said to him, Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison. Hold on. That is not exactly what, even though this story did take place on Passover, what I am looking for is confirmation of Jacob's birth on Passover. Let me find this. All right. Give me just a minute to. Maybe this is it. Ah, here it is. Okay, I apologize. That was the wrong what I wanted to read. This will actually confirm that Isaac was born on the Passover, and that something that Rob and I talked about the timing of the curse that was upon Abraham's children, and of when that curse will be lifted. All right, and so it says this in the Legends of the Jews. Why should I risk the safety of my person, seeing that I know not whether Israel possesses merits making them worthy of redemption? I have reckoned up the years with care, and I have found that but 210 have elapsed since the covenant of the pieces made with Abraham. And at that time thou didst ordain 400 years of oppression for his seed. But God overturned all his objections. He spake to Moses, saying, I will be with thee. Whatever thou desirest I will do, so that the redemption will in very truth be realized through me, in accordance with my promise to Jacob. The little ones that Israel will carry up out of Egypt, I will provide with food for 30 days. This shall prove to thee in what manner I will supply the needs of all. And as I will be at thy side, thou hast no need to fear any man. Respecting thy doubt, whether Israel deserves to be redeemed, this is my answer. They will be permitted to go forth from Egypt on account of the merits they will acquire at this mountain, whereon they will receive the Torah through thee. And thy reckoning of the end is not correct, for the 400 years of bondage began with the birth of Isaac, not with the going down of Jacob into Egypt. Therefore the appointed end hath come. And so you see here that Passover and the freeing of the Egyptians began with the birth of Isaac and was fulfilled on that exact day, 400 years from the time of his birth. And so it's not with the going down of Jacob into Egypt that began the captivity of Abraham's seed in Egypt, but, or, even that with Joseph and his presence there in Egypt, but actually begins with the birth of Isaac. And so exactly 400 years later, on Passover, which is the same night that Isaac was born, the Israelites were freed from their enslavement. And here's the second witness to that. That was found in the Legends of the Jews in Book 4, Moses in Egypt. This one is from the Perkdi Rabbi Eliezer, and it's the second witness of this same thing that I just revealed. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Azariah, said, Is it not so that the Israelites did not dwell in Egypt except for 210 years? But in order to teach thee, know that this is so. Come and see. For when Joseph went down to Egypt, he was 17 years old. And when he stood before Pharaoh, he was 30 years old, as it is said. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And the 7 years of plenty and the 2 years of famine, behold, they are 39 years in all. And Levi, the son of Jacob, was 6 years older than Joseph. And when he went down to Egypt, he was 45 years. And the years of his life in Egypt were 92 years. Behold, all of them amount to 137 years, as it is said. And the years of the life of Levi were 137 years. On his going down to Egypt, his wife bare unto him Jochebed, that's the mother of Moshe, his daughter, as it is said, and the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed. And she was 130 years old when she bare Moshe, or Moses. Sorry, I know I get y'all confused sometimes, but Moshe is simply Moses in the Hebrew. As it is said, and Moses was 80 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. Behold, the total is 210 years in all. And thus it says, and they shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. Rabbi Eleazar, the son of Arak, said to them, the Holy One, blessed be he, said this to Abraham only at the hour when he had seed. As it is said, thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. From the time when Isaac was born until Israel went forth from Egypt, 400 years elapsed. Rabbi Yochanan, son of Zakkai, said to him, verily it is written, now the sojourning of the children of Israel, which they sojourned in Egypt, was 430 years. Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. He answered him, saying, 210 years Israel abode in Egypt, and 5 years before Jacob came to Egypt, there were born unto Joseph the fathers of 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they belonged to the Israelites. Behold, we have 215 years of days and nights. This equals 430 years. For the Holy One, blessed be he, reduced the time for the sake of the merit of the patriarchs, for they are the mountains of the world, and for the sake of the merit of the mothers, for they are the hills of the world. And concerning them the scripture says, the voice of my beloved, behold, he cometh, leaping upon the mountains and slapping over the hills. And so there you have it again, confirming witness that Jacob gave birth, Rebecca, Isaac was born unto Abraham by Sarah, and Isaac was born 400 years before the Passover. And so there you have the 2 confirming witnesses as to the 430 years of servitude that the Israelites underwent in Egypt before the fulfillment of their release from bondage by Moshe, who was a type and a shadow of the coming of Messiah. And so in my opinion, it's just, absolutely mind-blowing, the prophecy and how God knew the end from the beginning and related and tied it into everything. And even the story of Passover, as I said, and as I'll talk about more in detail tomorrow evening with the show on the garments of power and the rod of wonder. The rod, as I said, was a lemma from the tree of life, and it was also encoded prophetically with knowledge that it would be used instrumentally in the freeing and the liberating of the Israelites from Egypt during the Exodus. And so that's another aspect of the story that we will cover tomorrow evening. I will be on again with Rob Skiba tonight, midnight to 2 a.m. Those of you that can stay up and that are wanting to join us in live broadcasts, just catch us here in about 2 hours. We'll be live streaming right here on Zen Garcia. And you are welcome, Doug, and good to see you, Ty, and Phil, and Rock, and Ian, Clea, and My beloved Laurie Adams, Stephanie, good to see you, sister, on a mission. Malav, Ben Schwagel, hope you're doing well, brother. And all the others that are in the chat room, we greatly appreciate. Love all of you. And don't forget that this Saturday, we're going to be picking up with the DRC, the Digital Readers Book Club, and we'll be reading Yahushua Christ, the infancy gospel, early childhood, and lost years, which, in my opinion, are incredible, incredible stories. Be blessed, all. See you later this evening. Shalom. May you be blessed. May you be protected.